Antifa is a terrorist organization, according to President Trump. But that could be a problem. Welcome back to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Across the country, protests over the death of George Floyd have turned into violent rioting and looting. Now, depending on who you talk to, that violence is either caused by white supremacists or a far-left radical group known as Antifa. I'll give you one guess which group Trump is blaming. So, what can be done to stop the violence sweeping the nation? Well, everyone knows the best policy decisions are always made on Twitter, which is why President Trump used Twitter to announce that Antifa will be labeled a terrorist organization.
The United States of America will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr, the boomer that he is, didn't use Twitter, but wrote this long statement ending with, "The violence instigated and carried out by Antifa and other similar groups in connection with the rioting is domestic terrorism and will be treated accordingly." Now, that's interesting, considering that known hate groups, like the KKK, are not considered domestic terrorist organizations. But Antifa, which stands for anti-fascists, will be? So, does that mean Trump is the racist president of America KKK? Well, like everything on this show, things are complicated. So, first, what is Antifa? Well, according to my favorite news source, Teen Vogue, Antifa aspires to create a better world, but the primary motivation is to stop racists from organizing. If you haven't been paying attention to Teen Vogue, the magazine has been called a champion of democratic socialism. But even if you don't trust Teen Vogue for some reason, the New York Times has a pretty similar definition. Antifa campaigns against actions they view as authoritarian, homophobic, racist, or xenophobic. Well, those are all bad things. So if Antifa is against them, then that's good, right? Obviously, Antifa isn't the problem. Trump's bluster is a distraction from police violence. What's that, Shelley? The Obama Department of Homeland Security concluded that left-wing Antifa forces were engaged in domestic terrorist violence. Wait, so Trump and Obama agree on Antifa? Things just became more complicated again, didn't they? The history of Antifa goes back many decades, but as Matt would say, that's not a rabbit hole I want to go down in this episode. Let us know in the comments if you'd like us to make a separate episode about the history of Antifa. Back to the Obama administration. By April 2016, authorities believed that anarchist extremists were the primary instigators of violence at public rallies against a range of targets. They were blamed by authorities for attacks on the police, government, and political institutions, along with symbols of the capitalist system, racism, social injustice, and fascism. But it wasn't until after Donald Trump was elected that Antifa started to get mainstream media attention in the US, like this in 2017.
Overnight mayhem on campus. The University of California, Berkeley erupting in flames as over 1,000 came out to protest an appearance by the self-described right-wing internet troll Milo Yiannopoulos. 6 people were injured, including this Trump supporter who was pepper sprayed.
According to the BBC, Antifa does not shy away from militant protest methods, including the destruction of property and sometimes physical violence. Apparently so. And although Antifa calls themselves anti-fascist, the BBC also describes Antifa as anti-government and anti-capitalist, and says their methodologies are often perceived as more closely aligned with anarchists than the mainstream left. Now, some say Antifa isn't really an organization because there's no central leadership. It's too amorphous. Antifa groups claim to have no leader and no hierarchy, but authorities following them believe they are organized via decentralized networks of cells that coordinate with each other. According to Andy No, a journalist who has been covering Antifa for years, Antifa are horizontally organized, meaning they don't have figureheads or leaders. It's part of their ideology that there should be no authority or state. Mistake to then assume this means they have no organization. It's a different type of organizing media isn't used to. FYI, Antifa aren't fond of Andy No.
Conservative journalist Andy No suffered a brain hemorrhage after being attacked while he was covering an Antifa protest. There he is in the middle of that horrible video.
Andy No, by the way, is an openly gay Vietnamese American. Obviously, Antifa is targeting him because he is both racist and homophobic. But even if Antifa is organized in a decentralized way, that wouldn't matter according to US law. Loosely knit groups that carry out violent criminal actions still qualify for law enforcement. So this then brings us back to Trump labeling Antifa a terrorist organization. According to the US Penal Code, domestic terrorism means activities that A, involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, and B, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So does this fit that definition? Well, this is America Uncovered, so you know things must be more complicated than that. The definition of domestic terrorism I just gave you is just that, a definition in federal law. But domestic terrorism is not criminalized in federal law. Yeah, it's confusing. So let me explain it like this. Labeling Antifa domestic terrorists doesn't change the crimes they can be punished for. They'd still be charged with arson, destruction of property, assault, and so on. But labeling them domestic terrorists would allow the federal government to use more tools to go after them, including federal law enforcement executing search warrants across multiple states and seizing their assets. Those expanded powers are made possible by the Patriot Act. Thanks, guys. But domestic terrorism is still totally different than international terrorism. With domestic terrorism, the crimes are committed by Americans on US soil, and the suspects have the same right to due process as any other American. And while the FBI might get involved, their specific crimes are usually still handled by state and local police. International terrorism is a whole other ballgame. International terrorists are not protected by the US Constitution. The US government has much broader power to put surveillance on them and not treat them with due process. But at the same time, these powers are needed because the US may not be able to work with local law enforcement in the countries where international terrorists operate. There's a reason the US government didn't tell Pakistan they were going after Osama bin Laden. But the point is, domestic terrorism is not a crime itself. It's more like a description of certain types of crimes. And law enforcement at the state and local level is already able to go after Antifa for those specific crimes. So, why does President Trump want to label Antifa as a terrorist organization? Like I said, labeling them domestic terrorists would give the federal government some extra power to go after them. But Trump can't label Antifa international terrorists. Only the US State Department can do that, and they wouldn't unless Antifa was operating on behalf of a foreign agent. And then, like I said, it's a whole other ballgame. Unlike Americans suspected of crimes, these foreign agents may be subjected to eavesdropping and searches under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, without showing probable cause of a crime. If Antifa were labeled as international terrorists, we would be empowering the federal government to spy on and potentially detain Americans without due process. And that's something President Trump should know to be concerned about. After all, during the Obama administration, the FBI used FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. Some of the warrants were later declared invalid. So is it really a good idea to give the FBI more power to spy on Americans? That should concern you, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is also the reason why American white supremacist groups have not been labeled international terrorists, even though there are white supremacist groups in other countries. When you label Americans as international terrorists, you strip away all their legal protections. And it's just not necessary when U.S. law enforcement already has the tools to go after Americans for the crimes they commit on U.S. soil. So, what do you think about labeling Antifa a terrorist organization? Fight it out in the comments below. Use words, not bricks. Please. And remember, America Uncovered can't continue without support from viewers like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help America Uncovered survive YouTube demonetization and censorship. Head over to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to contribute. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. This is America Uncovered.